Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. This is going to be my second Reddit scary story reading video. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into story number 1. I'm a male, and when I was 16, I was walking home from the grocery store alone. I was down the street around the corner from my house, so I maybe had 5 more minutes until I was home. I saw an old, sketchy looking beige sedan parked really strangely across from this whack-ass apartment complex. It was parked diagonally, with the front tyres up on the sidewalk and the back tyres partially in the street. I got really bad vibes, so I crossed to the opposite side of the street and kept walking. Well, my instincts were right, because the car suddenly starts, pulls into the street, and the driver's window rolls down. This huge dude was sitting in the front seat. He hung his arm out the window and his bicep was bigger than my head. I'm a small dude, just 5'2". At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but then he started driving directly next to me in the wrong lane, matching my pace, which was really slow because I was walking uphill. There's no way you can just be driving that slowly uphill in the wrong lane accidentally. I started to panic. I didn't want to run because I knew I couldn't outrun the guy, so I didn't want to start a chase I would lose. I didn't know anybody in that particular neighborhood, so I didn't want to risk knocking on a stranger's door and being turned away, or accidentally knock on the door of a creep. Plus, there was only one house on my side of the street, and then a park. Some guy passed me and smiled, but he looked really small like me, and I was afraid of involving him and getting us both killed. I couldn't just go home because I didn't want the creep in the car to know where I lived. After walking for what felt like hours, but was actually only a few minutes, I reached the neighborhood park and ran right into the middle of it. There were only 2 people in the park, a dad with a little kid, so I still didn't feel safe. The stalker stopped his car in the middle of the road in front of the park and just waited for me. I called my dad crying and told him what happened, and he said, "I'll rip his face off with my bare hands." 30 seconds later, my dad's car comes barreling around the corner and the creep sped off. My dad tried to chase him, but we lost him. The only reason I was out walking that day was because I was trying to get over my fear of walking alone. Story number 2. I have been followed numerous times. The most severe was a mentally ill woman who stalked me thoroughly for a few months. I'll try to keep it brief, but it was so pervasive and lingering and awful. She met me where I worked, which is a customer-facing job, and latched onto me for reasons unknown. She was severely mentally ill and believed everyone around her was some kind of imposter or replica or something along those lines. Massive CIA conspiracies all swirling around this one pretty average woman. It began with her sneaking around my workplace watching me, and over the most of a year escalated to her learning my route home, where I lived, who my friends were, where I shopped in the neighbourhood, and what times I was usually home alone. She would follow me down the street, filming me, and post about it on her social media. Her psychosis had somehow made it so that everyone but a couple of people were agents out to get her, and I was somehow her friend. She called me a name that is nothing like mine, and no one seems to know where she came up with it. Work was made very aware of the circumstances and didn't seem to care, even after they learned she was following me up to a block away from my house. Eventually, a few nights in a row, my neighbours informed me that she had been outside my place, silently staring at my locked door, muttering threateningly to anyone who acknowledged her. This happened while I was home alone. My job refused to ban her from the property until she threatened my boss. She was following me around the clock. Somehow, I was on constant alert. I started changing my patterns wildly to evade her, and hiding weapons around my home in case she tried to come in through a ground floor window. She had what one acquaintance called stabby eyes. I never felt safe in my neighbourhood again. After leaving that job and taking a third shift gig to throw her off, I would walk home the long way through quiet residential areas. It seemed safer at first because it was so late/early, but every so often a smallish pickup truck with blinding LED headlights would roll out of nowhere and crawl along about 20 feet behind me for a few blocks at a time. It seemed like the same truck, sounded the same, similar size, same MO every time. After giving me a good solid scare, the truck would speed up just enough to pass me and always drove as close as they could to attempt to clip me. I was always too blinded by the headlights to get a face or plate number. They knew exactly what they were doing, and it scares me to think how much farther they might have went with someone else in that position. Story number 3. I had a stalker for a couple of weeks. It was actually another man. As a grown man, I had never really considered that another person could make me feel so uncomfortable. It started when I was on the subway one day. I sat on an inside seat and this middle-aged guy sat next to me. After a couple of stops, some people got off and I stood up to find a new seat since I hate the inside seat. I sat across the aisle and the guy who was previously sitting next to me smiled at me. Being a polite dude, I smiled back. He took this as an invitation for a random subway stranger. Not to mention, I didn't ask him anything about his life. I did make one mistake though. I told him what field I worked in. Soon enough, my train pulls up at the station. Not long before, I had checked my transit app, and I knew that my bus would be arriving just as my train was, so I would have to run to catch it. When the subway doors opened, I was the first one out the very front doors and ran up the escalator skipping steps. Now, I'm a youngish guy in decent shape, so I was pretty quick and made it on the bus. But just before I pulled out, we stopped and the same guy gets on my bus. This means he must have been running behind me as well. He didn't have a phone out or anything, so he couldn't have known the bus was there. Over the next 2 weeks, I started seeing this guy everywhere. He started showing up at my work and just standing outside the door. Every time I saw him, he pulled a 180 and went in the other direction. He would often cross the street and stand at a bus stop for a few minutes. I would watch him from the window at work and he wouldn't even take the bus. He would just stand there, facing my work, then leave after a while. I started seeing him on the train and bus all the time too. I think since I had always been so predictable, leaving at the same time, he knew which ones to take. After I was thoroughly creeped out, I started changing my schedule, taking a different line and going into work early. This, combined with me going back to school, seemed to change things enough that he couldn't find me. I had considered that maybe our lives just overlapped enough that I saw him around, but the way he would wait by my work or turn around when I saw him makes me think he was waiting for me, but didn't want to be seen. I don't know, maybe his intentions are completely legitimate and he thought I was stalking him. Either way, I don't want that to happen again. In a city full of people, sometimes the creepiest thing is being noticed. Story number 4. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington near Mount Rainier. Like, not an official campground, just way out in the forest where I wouldn't have expected another human for miles. One night I wake up and hear something. I open my tent and there's a guy sitting by where my fire had been, right outside my tent. Nothing particularly noteworthy about the guy, just a fairly regular looking dude, just sitting there a couple of feet from my tent. No bag or pack or anything with him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent, his eyes got huge, like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well, after writing it off as just some odd occurrence, and a guy that was probably high or something, and had somehow managed to set up a camp coincidentally not far from mine. Then, 2 days after that, and 10 to 15 miles away in totally random directions that nobody could take the same path as by accident, I was sitting by the fire that night and started hearing noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I called out to them, and out of the darkness someone was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no. I don't even think that's a real place there. They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but they yelled, "Aim that away!" And kind of spooked and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did. After like 15 minutes, decided the trip was very over first thing in the morning and hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking circles outside my tent, but by the time I mustered the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal making noises. At first in the distance, but slowly decided it sounded more like a human making animal calls. But it could have actually been an animal. I didn't see the guy again. But it really did sound like a person making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to my car. The relief was so strong. To this day, this was probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I have no idea who the guy was or what his intentions were, and no way of getting an explanation, but I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. And story number 5. When I was 14, my longtime childhood friend and I, both having super strict parents, used to sneak out in the middle of the night during our summer break to just hang out, walk around town, and generally sneak around feeling daring. One night, I went and stood outside her house at the usual time, but she didn't show. I eventually gave up and went to walk back home. About halfway back, a car came down the street towards me. I was on the same side of the road, and some instinct told me to cross to the other side. Just as I decided to do so, the car started slowing down. So I crossed and it sped up again. As it passed me, the driver turned his face towards me and gave me a penetrating stare that chilled me. As the street was otherwise completely silent and deserted, I could easily hear this car reach the end of the road, then turn and head back my way. Thinking fast, I waited until he'd almost reached me, before running back to the other side of the road. This time, the look he gave me was unmistakably angry. He sped up again, and as I was just passing a smaller side road, I ran down there as fast as I could. I knew there was an alleyway at the other end that I could get home through, and he couldn't drive down that way. Again, I heard the car reach the other end of the road and turn around again. As the sound of the engine approached, I dived behind a parked car. He came down my side road, driving very, very slowly. Peeking out, I caught a glimpse of the driver looking left and right as his car crept along the road. He was clearly looking for me. As soon as the car had turned a corner out of sight, I ran up a nearby gravel driveway that turned out to have a couple of lock-up garages at the other end. By some amazing stroke of luck, I found one was unlocked. I slipped inside, pulled the door closed, crawled under a tarp in a dark corner, and just waited. They came to my end of the driveway and just stood there for a while. I don't even know how he knew I was there, as he wouldn't have been able to see me go up there in his rearview mirror, unlike he presumably had with the side road, but apparently he did. Eventually he seemed